So, some people ask, is nonviolence effective? Or is nonviolence more effective than violence? And some even go to the length of asking, is nonviolence as effective as violence? We live in a world where violence often makes the news. So people are wondering whether nonviolence really is effective.
Well, it's not necessary that being in the media, going first page or headline, doesn't mean that you are on the right path. Very often, what attracts the media, it's violence itself. And what attracts the media, which is actually a product of consumerist globalization, is it goes to where there is violence, where there is, that kind of disturbance. So I think the confidence that we have that we are on the right path, and maintenance of the non-violent, consistently leading the struggle in its path, we must maintain it steadily, and shouldn't really, respond or react to how the Chinese are provoking. Looking at the examples of Kashmir, for example, or Palestinian, and earlier the Sri Lankan Tamils. The reason why the media goes over there, and now the serious the case in Syria, is because there is violence, there is gore, and the violence sells, and therefore we must maintain steadily in our conviction and in the power of nonviolence.
There's also the practical question, and I think this is paramount for any struggle, especially for Tibetans. If we're talking about violent battle, then nobody is more skilled, nobody is better resourced or practiced to carry out violence and to engage in violent battle than the Chinese government and Chinese forces. And certainly Tibetans would be and are at an incredible disadvantage in that battlefield if we choose those methods. And so there's a very practical question, aside from the moral and principled question, there's a very practical question about whether or not we could even be successful. Or in fact, if we do engage in such, in this field of battle and use violence, the cost for certain on the Tibetan side would be far greater and far higher than it would ever be on the Chinese side. And in practical terms, just looking at our population and looking at our numbers, this is obviously not a viable road for us. There's another consideration which actually one of the key things to the success of a struggle is the people's widespread participation in that struggle. And when it comes to violence, whether sort of traditional warfare or guerrilla warfare, actually, the vast majority of people cannot and will not, women and children and young people, old people, they can't really participate in an armed struggle. And actually, we need, for success, it's shown time and time again that when the majority of the population can become engaged in the resistance, that's when you really see results. That's when the opponent, the regime, the authoritarian dictatorship, that's when they really feel a test to their legitimacy and their leadership. And that is just simply not possible when violent methods are used.
Yeah, that reminds me of a study that we have often talked about. It came out probably last year or the year before from two scholars, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, and now they put out this book called Why Civil Resistance Works. So basically in this book, they actually released a really important cutting-edge study. What they did was research hundreds of different movements, both armed struggles and non-violent struggles, right? Over the period of the last a little more than 100 years. And basically what they found by doing this study is really interesting, because it's almost counterintuitive for so many people, because people always assume, okay, violence, there's drama. Non-violence, there's no drama. So violence must be more effective. People assume that, but this study completely debunked this kind of myth, and it actually found that the armed struggles were effective or successful 26% of the time, and the non-violent struggles were actually successful 53% of the time. So clearly, in this sense, from a strategic perspective, non-violent struggles were, based on history, more effective than armed struggles.
But at the same time, it's not that Tibet had not been in the news or on the front page or the headlines. 2008, the Tibetan national uprising that spread across Tibet was the most important news for almost about 2 to 3 months. And at that time, perhaps if you actually look at why it was on news, is because there was a probability of change. News is not just because there's a violence. Here, there is a probability of change at the time of Beijing 2008 Olympics. And it did change a lot of things to the outside, international awareness, and most importantly for Tibetan people inside Tibet. So the probability of change that was there, however small, it attracted. But now we have to look for, there will be a time where the probability of change within China and also in Tibet will be huge. And even then, when we steadily maintain non-violent method as our own struggle, what more newsability, what more attractive, endearing, or even sexy, leading a non-violent resistance movement against the largest military power in the world. So we will be there, but then we need to maintain this commitment to non-violent movement. And over that, here, this is not even about choice, violent or non-violent. No, our whole Tibetan culture, whole milieu today is very steadily based on the non-violent principle, and also many centuries of non-violent culture. And today, our belief in non-violence is being sharpened, and we are at the height of it. And therefore, I'm very confident that we will not only win freedom for ourselves, actually help China bring some kind of positive change in their own country.
And I think if you consider, so for me, a lot of this has to do with practical and strategic questions, and without denying, we would never want to deny nor hide nor shy away from the reality of the Tibetan warrior past, the great Tibetan resistance that fought an important, critical struggle against China's invading forces, the Chushigandu, all of that. This is not in any way to negate or to undermine the contribution, the very real and important contribution that was made to Tibetan history and struggle as a result of those efforts. I think it's also just, for us to consider, even in this day and age, what would happen if Tibetans were indeed it's so important that we maintain a nonviolent discipline, especially in the coming months and years, because there's also the question for us of that the Chinese government is looking, I would say, looking for the excuse to, I firmly believe, looking for the excuse to wipe us out, to shut us down, to crush us beyond recognition, and that's what they want, and that's what violence would give them
the perfect excuse.
Right, and in the long term, we need to have as many of our troops on board. We need to have as many people as possible in the struggle and able to engage. And if there was a violent backlash on Tibetans, I really, it just strikes me that we are ultimately, we would be the losers, both, just in the principle sense, sure, but in the very practical sense.